Hey there, this is astrologer DK Brainerd, and this is going to be the first in a series of videos on Chiron in the signs. So we're going to start at the very beginning and talk about Chiron in Aries. So definitely want to say that if you're analyzing Chiron in your chart or you're working with, you're an astrologer, you're working with clients, you definitely want to know, Chiron's sign position, house position, aspect situation, but there are some remarkable thematic similarities among all natives born with Chiron in the same sign. So we're going to start by looking at Aries, the personal fire sign. Chiron, as we covered in the earlier videos, has a highly elliptical orbit. So Chiron spends a couple years in each of the signs of Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, and Chiron spends about 8.5 years in the sign of Aries. So the last three, including the current transits of Chiron and Aries, are 1918 to 1927, 1968 to 1977, and 2018 to 2026. And with any of those date ranges, in the first year of the transit, Chiron's probably going to spend some time in the sign and some time in the previous sign. So in this case, Aries Pisces. And in the last year, it'll probably spend some time in Aries, some time in Taurus. So look at your ephemeris, do your free chart on astro.com if you want to find out exactly. If you're in one of those cusp years and you want to find out exactly where your Chiron is, consult your favorite Chiron qualified astrologer or another astrologer. The astrological sort of boil everything down to two words statement for Aries is I am. So Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's the personal fire sign. So fire, creativity, inspiration, leadership, enthusiasm. But personal fire, Aries is a trailblazer. It's a risk taker. It's a pioneer. It can be a daredevil. And basically, Aries is on a search in this lifetime to find its identity, to answer the question, who am I? The way Aries does that is through these inner impulses, fire, that rise up within the self and push the native to go on adventures and to test their limits. So Aries, can be kind of a lone wolf sign, but it's big into, I'm going to go beyond the limits of what I've known. And Aries can make a lot of mistakes when they're, in quotes, mistakes, right? But Aries is right to follow its impulses and to explore new territory and to take risks and to make big changes. And a lot of times it can be hard for an Aries to defend why they're making those changes or, to rationalize or explain it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. With Chiron and Aries, so Chiron, again, going back to the first three videos, the Chiron wound is always administered in childhood. And the wound with Chiron and Aries is the wound of being a self or being allowed to be a self, having a right to be who I am. And, just a side note, I look at the Chiron placements as like these mini soul groups. So Chiron and Aries, let's just say from 68 to 77, this is a mini soul group that came in to experience having a similar wound and to go on a similar healing journey. Obviously, sign and house placement, other planetary placements are going to impact the way that shows up. But with all of these natives, there's the emphasis on a wound to the self and needing to heal that wound. So let's talk about the wound and how that shows up. It's easy for me with a strong background in inner child healing to look at this as like, well, one of the parents is, messed up and crushed this person's sense of self or self-esteem. But there's a lot of ways that this wound of the self can play out. I will say that I've had many Chiron and Aries clients tell me that they're usually the mother, but sometimes the father told them explicitly, I wish you had never been born. You're a burden. You ruined my life. That kind of energy, a lot of times that energy is there in the family system, even if it's not verbalized explicitly. But I have had clients where with Chiron and Aries, where that wound played out as the family was in extreme poverty, and the child had to just totally kind of suppress herself in order not to be a burden to the overwhelmed mom. And another client where the child had to start working early because of a death of one of the parents, and so wasn't really able to express individually. However that wound plays out, it's going to impact the person's sense of self, severely, right? So, um, with Aries, with Chiron and Aries, the native learns early on that I must not trust myself. I must not follow my impulses. I must not be too passionate. It's wrong to have desires, or it's pointless to have desires because your desires will never be realized. You'll never get what you want in life. I'm a burden. I actually hurt people by my presence. My presence is painful, toxic, even murderous. Is a pretty common expression of this placement. So one of the things that we want to look at with Chiron and Aries is ruled by Mars, the warrior planet, right? Anger, energy, assertiveness, aggression, drive, directed, outer going energy. And we want to look at where Mars is in the natal chart for anyone with Chiron and Aries, because Chiron, in my experience, always shows up as a wound early on in life. It's going to have a debilitating effect on wherever Aries is by house placement in the chart, and also by where Aries ruler is. And Mars can also help us with healing that wound. So what are some of the ways that we can heal the wound of Chiron and Aries? I would definitely look at Mars by house and sign placement and aspect situation. Because Mars is a personal planet, we can really work with Mars and strengthen it and bring it into a better expression. And, the position of Mars in the chart is going to help you understand how the native, or you, if you're watching this for yourself, how you express your anger, assertiveness, aggressive energy. And obviously, for many, many, many people in this society, anger is one of the emotions that has been, that's extremely toxic. People who grew up in a childhood with an angry father figure or angry mother, or some bigger person that was the only one who was allowed to express anger in that dysfunctional family system, is going to have challenges with expressing anger correctly as an adult until they do some healing with the wounded inner child. Since the Chiron wound is always administered or always shows up in childhood, working with the inner child, especially, this is true across all Chiron placements in my experience, but especially with this deep wound to the core self, is really, really important and really helpful for people with Chiron in Aries. So, one of the things, if you're an astrologer or counselor and you're a healer, you're working with somebody with Chiron and Aries, I think one of the first things that we want to look at is they need permission to find their true self. So Aries is an interesting sign, right? Because people think, pop astrology, people think, oh, Aries, they're selfish, they're me. They only care about themselves. Which, there's a certain level of self-interest that needs to be present with Aries. But a lot of Aries actually are playing out sort of the seventh house polarity of Aries because they've been so damaged, whether they have Chiron and Aries or not. But this is certainly going to tend to be the case with natives who have Chiron and Aries. And, one of the things that we can work with these clients with, or with yourself, is no jade. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that formulation. I think it comes from the codependent kind of recovery movement, but no justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining. So Aries 7th house Libra is their expert. Libra is an expert at rationalizing. It's an expert at explaining. It's an expert at, kind of crafting these mental frameworks. Libra is an air sign, right? to justify or explain or argue or defend. And to be clear, we're not talking about you if you're a Libra Sun person. We're talking about this seventh house polarity of Aries. But when Chiron and Aries is still in a really wounded place, these natives are probably going to be very prone to rationalizing their experience, rationalizing their choices, and specifically rationalizing why they can't be who they are or why they can't even know who they are. So that's a great defense against breaking a dysfunctional family pattern or escaping from an identity as the eternally wounded victim is, well, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing here, or I don't know who I am, and I can't know who I am. It's wrong to know who I am. And to be fair, a lot of that sense of wrongness or judgment probably was put on these natives in childhood. But we want to encourage them to find their true self and to go on an Aries and I mean, I've said this to many clients with Chiron and Aries that, you're probably not going to know what you want or know what the right path is without getting out the door and trying something. And so it's really important for these natives to learn to trust their impulses, to learn to do things that can't be defended to a partner in a dysfunctional relationship, to mom or dad, to the kids, to coworkers, colleagues, to just take steps in moving toward what feels real and authentic to the self. And that's how we learn. That's how Aries learns to be. It learns who it really is. It learns to have an identity that works for it, is by impulsively jumping over here and then impulsively running over here and realizing, hey, I kind of really like, I had this impulse to move to Topeka, Kansas, and there's a couple things I really like about Topeka, but there's a lot of stuff that's not working so well for me. So then I'm moving to Sacramento, California. Well, there's some things I like about Sacramento, but in each one of those moves, they're learning about who they really are, what their authentic desires are, and who they're not, and what they don't want more of. So encourage yourself, encourage your Chiron and Aries clients to find their true self, to take risks, to realize that it is a journey. It's not something that's just usually going to be fully formed and you jump right into, and it's like, oh, now I know who I am. And really to develop placing a premium on doing what I'm passionate about, doing what brings me joy, doing what brings me energy, what brings me life. So self-discipline is another really great way of working with Chiron and Aries and of healing that wound to the self. And Barbara Hand-Clow, in her book on Chiron, talks about this, and she mentions Carlos Castaneda as an example of a Chiron and Aries native who, developed this intense practice of shamanism, after his work with the Toltec shaman Don Juan. And that being a great way of channeling it. Martial arts, obviously another great way. But I feel like that self-discipline is anything that, self-discipline literally means becoming a disciple of the self. So it's any consistent practice that specifically for Chiron and Aries develops that martial channel. So strengthens the Mars energy in ways that are beneficial and congruent with the self. And then healing the inner child, really, really important, just non-negotiable is, and I think with that seventh house polarity and the tendency to rationalize and explain, a lot of Chiron and Aries natives, especially, say before the Chiron return at age 50, are going to be to some degree stuck in a place of rationalizing what happened to them in childhood, rationalizing why their sense of self was crushed and why that was necessary, or why the people around them couldn't do any better. And while all that may be somewhat true circumstantially, it doesn't change the fact that the inner child was severely wounded and needs a lot of help and a lot of encouragement and a lot of belief and a lot of nurturing to be able to be retrieved back into the soul of the person so that they can become a whole self. So I hope you found this helpful. I'll be back with Chiron and Taurus next. And till next time, this is astrologer DK Brainerd saying, don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share this with your friends. And may you go with the stars.